Claims of Russian President Vladimir Putin's helicopter being at the epicenter of a Ukrainian drone attack in Kursk Oblast were reportedly fabricated by the Kremlin, the Moscow Times reported, citing 4 Russian government sources. A Russian military commander claimed on May the 20th that Putin's helicopter was subject to a Ukrainian drone attack in Russia's Kursk Oblast, as Putin made his first known visit to the region since Moscow claimed its recapture. We were simultaneously engaged in an air defense battle and ensuring airspace security for the president's helicopter flight, Yury Dashkin, commander of an air defense division, said, as cited by the Russian news agency RBC on May the 25th. The helicopter was effectively at the epicenter of the response to the massive drone attack. Multiple sources within the government and the Kremlin told the Moscow Times that security officials promoted this shocking and risky episode in the media to convince Russians that their leader is not hiding behind others, but is also supposedly taking risks and making sacrifices. Amid regular drone strikes, chaos at airports and mobile communication outages, this televised stunt was intended to portray Putin as someone who shares the dangers with the country and thus sends a message to the public. War is war. The Moscow Times reported that Putin had indeed visited Kursk Oblast, to which, according to the official narrative, he had travelled by helicopter. In fact, the oblast is frequently targeted by Ukrainian attacks. However, the sources said Putin's security had been ensured at the highest possible level. No one would ever allow such criminal negligence, not even in a nightmare, said one official close to Putin's administration and familiar with his security system. The Moscow Times reported that the sensational claim that Putin's helicopter had found itself in the epicenter of a large-scale enemy drone attack was disseminated by the Russian Defense Ministry via the state-run VGTRK television channel. Kremlin-aligned reporters did not accompany Putin on this trip, nor did a professional filming crew. The footage was captured by other individuals, including a security officer, 2 informed sources told the Moscow Times. The reportedly fabricated story comes as Kiev has ramped up its attack on Moscow, launching hundreds of Ukrainian kamikaze drones towards the Russian capital. While none have appeared to have reached Moscow, the attacks have caused significant disruptions to commuter air traffic.
Fighters of the Unmanned Systems Battalion of the 65th Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces have intercepted and struck armored combat vehicles and manpower of the occupying Russian army in the occupied territory of Zaporizhia region, at a distance from the front line. The strikes carried out by kamikaze drones destroyed a total of 5 armored personnel carriers, several other armored combat vehicles, and Russian servicemen in the area, which were advancing and also parked in the open.
Occupied Mariupol is turning into a lawless zone like Lugansk or Donetsk. The Kadirovites are establishing their own rules in the city with Moscow's consent. The famous Russian Z-blogger Ivan Otrakovsky spoke frankly about this. The propagandist noted that even among those local residents who had pro-Russian views, disappointment in Russia is growing. Mariupol was given over to the Chechens with all the consequences, instead of allowing the locals to build their own future. All this causes extreme rejection. It feels like they are doing everything to make the locals disappointed. Otrakovsky wrote. He specified that the impudence and wild practices of the new masters of the city horrify the local population. Mariupol, which has been under Russian occupation for 3 years, has become a real trap for local residents. Those who lost their homes during the fighting are forced to defend their rights in the occupation courts, but they face outright mockery, writes Astra. A local resident said that the authorities are forcing people to seek compensation through the courts, which often do not resolve issues even in their first instance. If the case reaches the second instance, there are no guarantees there either. Moreover, contrary to the laws of Big Russia, Mariupol residents are required to pay a state fee of 3,000 rubles instead of the required 300. Local residents are outraged. Having lost their only home and property, they are forced to pay exorbitant amounts for filing lawsuits and additional paid certificates. Even if the court makes a decision, it is often vague and incorrect. People cannot afford to hire lawyers, and consultations are expensive. Back in January, residents of Mariupol who lost their homes due to military actions addressed Putin with posters reading "Homeless." The houses were demolished without the consent of the residents. New housing was promised, but now mortgage complexes are being built on the site of the destroyed houses. It is impossible to pay such loans with their income. Residents note that the real restoration of Mariupol has not yet begun. Instead of providing people with a roof over their heads, Russian developers are buying up land in the city center to build expensive residential complexes. In fact, thousands of residents have been turned into homeless people, and their property has been raided.